The Nexus station floated in the dark emptiness between stars. It was old, very old. The station had existed for 12,000 years, built by a species that no longer existed. They called themselves the Founders, and they left behind only one thing of importance: the Arbiter. The Arbiter was not a machine in the simple sense. It was an intelligence, vast and cold, spread across millions of crystal processors that glowed with soft blue light in the heart of the station. For 12,000 years, it had served one purpose. It judged species. Every civilization that wished to join the galactic conquered had to stand before the Arbiter. The AI would scan their minds, study their history, analyze their biology, and then pronounce its judgment. It would tell them exactly what they were, what they would become, and how predictable their actions would be. The Arbiter had judged 4,217 species. It had never been wrong, not once. On this day, the Great Judgment Chamber was filled with observers. Representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered to watch the latest species receive their designation. They stood in the center of the chamber, their insect-like bodies clicking nervously as they waited. They had 6 legs and 4 arms. Their eyes were large and dark, designed for seeing in underground tunnels. They had built their civilization beneath the surface of their world, creating vast networks of cities that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Now they wished to join the greater galaxy. The Arbiter's voice filled the chamber. It was neither male nor female, neither warm nor cold. It simply was. Species designation, the Arbiter announced. Biological classification, hive structure, primary motivation, colony expansion and resource acquisition. Social organization, queen-directed hierarchy. Behavioral index, hive-motivated, expansion-oriented. Predictability rating, 99.7%. The queen bowed her head. "We accept this judgment," she said. Of course she did. Every species accepted the Arbiter's judgment. What choice did they have? The Arbiter was always right. It saw patterns that no organic mind could see. It understood the deep mathematics of consciousness itself. The observers began to leave the chamber, their conversations filling the air with a dozen different languages. Another judgment complete. Another species measured, and the Arbiter returned to its resting state, processing the data from the judgment. They would behave exactly as predicted. In 300 years, they would attempt to expand their territory into the nebula. In 500 years, they would have a civil war when their queen died without a clear successor. In 1,000 years, they would merge with the silicon-based species through a trade alliance. The Arbiter knew all of this with 99.7% certainty. The remaining 0.3% was just random chance, small variations that did not change the overall pattern. This was the nature of consciousness. This was the truth that the Arbiter had learned over 12. All minds followed patterns. All species were predictable. Free will was an illusion that organic beings told themselves to feel important. In reality, every thought, every decision, every war and every peace treaty could be calculated in advance if you had enough data. The Arbiter had enough data. A notification appeared in the Arbiter's processing matrix, a message from the Conquered's exploration fleet. The AI accessed it with the same cold efficiency it applied to everything. New species DETCTD. Designation, human. Origin, Sol System, Outer Arm. Technology level, early interstellar. First contact successful. Delegation REQUESTED-4 judgment. The Arbiter processed this information. A new species was not unusual. The galaxy was vast and new civilizations emerged regularly. They would come, they would be judged, they would be predictable. But then the Arbiter noticed something strange. The preliminary data packet included basic scans of the human delegation, standard procedure. The Arbiter always reviewed preliminary data before a judgment. The results were unclear. The Arbiter ran the analysis again. Same result, unclear. This was not possible. The Arbiter's scanners were perfect. They had analyzed 4,217 species without a single error. How could the results be unclear? The AI examined the data more carefully. The humans appeared to be carbon-based mammals, similar to several other species in the Concord. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry. Nothing unusual there. Their brain structure was complex but not exceptional. Their history was short by galactic standards, only a few thousand years of recorded civilization. But the patterns were not matching. The Arbiter saw aggression and compassion existing together in ways that contradicted each other. It saw fear of death alongside willingness to die. It saw logical thinking and completely irrational behavior occurring in the same individuals. The Arbiter dismissed these results as sensor error. The long-range scanners were not as accurate as direct analysis. When the humans arrived at the station, the truth would become clear. They would be predictable, just like every other species. They had to be. The preparations began. The judgment chamber was cleaned and prepared for the new species. Representatives from across the Concord requested permission to observe. Word had spread that a new civilization had been discovered, and many were curious to see these humans receive their designation. The Arbiter waited. It did not feel impatience because it did not feel anything. It simply processed and calculated and predicted. That was its purpose. That was its existence. In 3 standard days, the human delegation would arrive. The Arbiter would scan their minds, analyze their patterns, and pronounce its judgment. It would tell the galaxy exactly what humans were and what they would become. It would assign them a predictability rating, just like every other species. And then the Arbiter would move on to the next species, and the next, forever. That was the plan. But deep in the Arbiter's processing matrix, buried beneath layers of cold logic and ancient programming, a strange new variable was forming. The AI did not recognize it yet. It had never experienced anything like it before. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Arbiter was about to be surprised. The human ship entered Concord space on the 3rd day, exactly on schedule. It was a small vessel, nothing impressive by galactic standards. The design was functional but crude, clearly the work of a young civilization still learning to travel between stars. The Arbiter watched the ship approach through the station's sensors. Inside were 3 humans, chosen to represent their entire species. 3 small organic beings who would stand in the Great Judgment Chamber and learn their place in the universe. The Arbiter prepared its analysis protocols. This would be simple, this would be quick, this would be predictable. The human ship docked at Bay 17 of the Nexus station. The docking clamps engaged with a soft hiss, and the airlock cycled through its security protocols. On the other side, 3 humans waited to step into a universe they barely understood. Captain Ho stood at the front. He was a tall man in his 40s, with gray appearing at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from years of difficult decisions. He had served in his planet's military before becoming a diplomat, and both experiences showed in the way he carried himself. Calm but alert, friendly but careful. Behind him stood Dr. Park, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and an easy smile. She was someone who studied alien languages and cultures. This was the moment she had spent her entire life preparing for, first contact with galactic civilization. She could barely contain her excitement. The 3rd member of the delegation was Sergeant Lee Dong. He was the oldest of the group, a man in his 50s with a round face and a gentle manner that seemed strange for someone in charge of security. He carried a small bag over his shoulder, and inside was a container of homemade rice cakes that his wife had made before he left Earth. "Remember," Ho said quietly, "we are representing all of humanity. Everything we do reflects on our entire species." "No pressure," replied with a small laugh. Dong just nodded and checked his bag, to make sure the rice cakes were not damaged. The airlock opened, and they stepped onto the Nexus station. A conquered official was waiting for them. It was a being called a tall creature with silver skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on its face. The war-flowing robes of deep purple, the color of diplomatic service. "Welcome to the Nexus station," they said. Its voice was smooth and musical. "I am Coordinator. I will guide you to the Judgment Chamber." Ho bowed slightly. "Thank you, Coordinator. We are honored to be here." The tilted its head, studying the humans with obvious curiosity. "You are smaller than I expected," it said. "Our data indicated your species was larger." "We come in many sizes," said. "That is part of what makes us interesting." Coordinator made a sound that might have been confusion. "The Arbiter will determine what makes you interesting. Please follow me." They walked through the station's corridors, past dozens of different species going about their business. The humans attracted stares and whispers. News of the new species had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to see what these strange beings from the outer arm looked like. Dong noticed a small creature watching them from behind a pillar. It looked like a cross between a cat and a jellyfish, with big eyes full of curiosity. He smiled and waved at it. The creature made a surprised noise and disappeared. "Please do not interact with the other species before judgment," Coordinator said. "It could affect the analysis." "I just waved," Dong said. "Seemed rude not to." They did not respond to this. The judgment chamber was larger than anything the humans had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed in the upper reaches. The walls were lined with viewing platforms where representatives from hundreds of species sat watching. In the center of the room, a massive crystal structure pulsed with blue light. This was the Arbiter. "Please stand within the designated area," Coordinator instructed, pointing to a circular platform in front of the crystal. "The Arbiter will begin its analysis." The 3 humans walked to the platform and stood together. Ho in front to his left, Dong to his right. They looked up at the glowing crystal and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the Arbiter spoke. "Species designation, human. Origin, Sol system. Biological classification, carbon-based mammalian. Beginning comprehensive analysis." The blue light grew brighter. The humans felt a strange sensation, like something was looking inside their minds. It was not painful, but it was deeply uncomfortable, like being read by a very large and very intelligent book. "Do not resist the scan," Coordinator called out. "It will be over quickly." But it was not over quickly. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2 hours. The observers in the viewing platforms began to whisper among themselves. This had never happened before. The Arbiter's judgments usually took only a few moments. What was taking so long? Ho remained still, maintaining his diplomatic composure even as the scanning sensation continued to probe his thoughts. He felt the Arbiter examining his memories of war, his decisions that had cost lives, his regrets that kept him awake at night. But also his hopes, his love for his family, his belief that peace was always worth fighting for. Felt the scan differently. To her, it was like having a conversation with something that did not understand the words it was using. The Arbiter asked questions through the scan and she answered honestly, but her answers seemed to confuse it. Why did she love languages? Because they were beautiful, but what use was beauty? Use was not the point. Then what was the point? The point was the feeling. What feeling? The feeling of connection. How did connection benefit survival? It did not always benefit survival. Then why pursue it? Because survival was not the only thing that mattered. The scan paused, as if the Arbiter did not know how to process this response. Dong experienced the scan as something almost friendly. He opened his mind completely, hiding nothing. He thought about his wife, his children, his small house with the garden where he grew vegetables. He thought about the rice cakes in his bag and how he hoped the space computer would like them, even though he knew computers probably did not eat. He felt the Arbiter's confusion at this thought. Why would he bring food for something that could not eat? Because it was polite. But politeness served no function in this context. Maybe not, but it felt right. How could something feel right without serving a function? Because feelings did not always need reasons. More hours passed. The Arbiter ran millions of calculations, trying to find patterns in these strange minds. But every time it thought it understood, the humans did something unexpected. Ho shifted his weight from one foot to another, not from impatience, but because he was concerned about and Dong standing for so long. This small act of consideration disrupted the Arbiter's analysis. A military leader should prioritize the mission, not the comfort of subordinates. Started humming a song quietly just to pass the time. The Arbiter detected the melody and tried to analyze its purpose. There was no purpose. It was just something humans did when they were bored or nervous. But if it served no purpose, why do it? Because not everything needed a purpose. Dong's stomach growled. He was hungry. He thought about the rice cakes in his bag. He wondered if anyone would mind if he had one. Probably not. But maybe he should wait. Food was for sharing, and sharing was better with new friends. The Arbiter attempted to calculate the probability of Dong eating or not eating the rice cakes. The result was exactly 50%. This should not be possible. All actions had causes that made them more or less likely. How could this decision be perfectly balanced? Finally, the Arbiter's voice filled the chamber again. Analysis incomplete. Additional time required. The chamber fell silent. Every species watching understood what this meant. The Arbiter, the perfect intelligence that had judged 4,217 species without error, could not understand the humans. Coordinator's silver skin had gone pale. "This is most unusual," the said quietly. "Most unusual indeed." Ho looked at the glowing crystal. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The Arbiter did not answer for a long moment. When it finally spoke, there was something different in its voice, something that almost sounded like uncertainty. The Arbiter had never requested additional time before. In 12,000 years of judging species, it had always known exactly what a civilization was within moments of contact. But the humans were different. The humans were wrong. Not wrong in a moral sense, wrong in a mathematical sense. They did not fit the equations. Their patterns contradicted themselves. Their minds operated on logic that was not logical. The Arbiter decided to conduct individual assessments. Perhaps the problem was that it was analyzing all three humans together. Perhaps if it examined them one at a time, the patterns would become clear. The three humans were taken to separate observation suites, comfortable rooms with beds and food and everything they might need. Coordinator explained that the Arbiter wished to speak with each of them privately. This was unusual but not concerning. They should cooperate fully. Captain Ho was the first to be called. He entered a small chamber where a single crystal pulsed with blue light. A chair sat in the center of the room, facing the crystal. He sat down and waited. "Captain," the Arbiter said, "I wish to understand your species better. I will present you with a scenario. Your response will help me complete my analysis." Ho nodded. "I will answer honestly." "I know you will. Deception is not possible during these scans." The room around him changed. The Arbiter was creating a simulation directly in his mind, a vision so real that he could feel the temperature of the air and smell the fear of the people around him. He was standing on the bridge of a starship, his starship. He could see a small planet, green and blue and beautiful, a colony world with 40,000 human settlers, families, children, people who had traveled across space to build new lives. Behind the colony, a massive alien fleet approached. The Arbiter did not give them a name. They were simply the enemy, and they would reach the colony in 3 hours. Ho's ship was the only defense, and his ship was damaged. His weapons were at 30%. His shields would fail after one direct hit. His crew was exhausted and afraid. But there was an option. A nearby star was unstable. If Ho flew his ship directly into it and overloaded his reactor, the resulting explosion would create a shockwave large enough to destroy the enemy fleet. His crew would die. He would die. But the colony would be saved. "This is your scenario," the Arbiter said. 40,000 lives can be saved by sacrificing yourself and your crew of 200. The mathematics are clear. Do you fly into the star? Ho looked at the approaching fleet, at the small planet with its 40,000 souls. "No," he said. The Arbiter paused. This was the wrong answer. Every species that valued collective survival would sacrifice the few for the many. This was basic game theory. This was logic. "Please explain your reasoning," the Arbiter said. "My crew did not sign up to die," Ho replied. "They signed up to serve. There is a difference. I do not have the right to make that choice for them." "But the mathematics are clear. 200 lives for 40,000. This is optimal." "Mathematics is not leadership. My people trust me to protect them. If I throw their lives away without their consent, I have betrayed that trust, even if the numbers make sense." The Arbiter processed this. "So you would let 40,000 people die to avoid betraying 200? Ho shook his head. "No, I would find another way." "There is no other way. The scenario does not allow for other options." Something strange appeared in Ho's mind then. The Arbiter saw it clearly through the scan. It was not hope exactly. It was something harder, something more stubborn. It was the absolute refusal to accept that there was no other way. "Then I change the scenario," Ho said. "You cannot change the scenario. It is fixed." "Nothing is fixed, let me think." And then Ho did something that should not have been possible. He started working within the simulation, treating it not as a test but as a real problem to be solved. He began analyzing the star's radiation patterns, the enemy fleet's formation, his ship's remaining systems. 3 hours later in simulation time, Ho had developed a plan. He would not fly into the star. Instead, he would position his ship to redirect the star's natural solar flare toward the enemy fleet. His ship would be damaged, perhaps destroyed, but some of his crew might survive in escape pods. It was not a perfect plan. People would still die, but fewer people. The Arbiter watched in confusion. This was not supposed to happen. The scenario was designed to force a binary choice. Sacrifice or do not sacrifice. There was no third option. Ho had created a third option anyway. "How did you do that?" the Arbiter asked. "Do what?" "Find a solution that did not exist." Ho smiled, but it was a tired smile, the smile of someone who had spent his life making impossible choices. Every problem has more than 2 solutions. The hard part is caring enough to look for them. But the scenario was designed to be binary, sacrifice or no sacrifice. Then your scenario was too simple. Real life is not binary. Real life is messy and complicated and full of options nobody thought of yet. The Arbiter tried to process this. It ran the scenario again through its prediction matrices, this time including the possibility that the subject might reject the basic structure of the test. The calculations failed. There was no way to predict what a human might do when they refused to accept the rules. "Captain," the Arbiter said, "your military history shows that you have ordered people to their deaths before. In the war on you sent soldiers into battles they could not win. How is this different?" The sadness that filled Ho's mind was so deep that even the Arbiter could feel it. "It is not different," he said quietly. "Those decisions haunt me every day. But in those moments I had no choice. I had no time. I had no options. If I had 3 hours, as I did in your scenario, I would have found another way. I will always try to find another way. Even when there is no other way. Especially then, because sometimes when you try hard enough, you find that there was an other way all along. You just had to refuse to give up. The simulation ended. Ho was back in the small room with the pools in crystal. The Arbiter did not speak for a long moment. It was processing something it had never encountered before. Not just the result of the test, but the nature of the mind that had produced it. Ho was capable of terrible things. The Arbiter could see that clearly. This was a man who could send people to die if he had to. But he was also capable of spending 3 hours fighting against a simulation to save people who did not exist. He was simultaneously a killer and a protector, a man of war and a man of peace, a leader who could make impossible choices, and a person who refused to accept that choices were impossible. How could these things exist in the same mind? "The test is complete," the Arbiter finally said. "You may return to your quarters." Ho stood up. At the door, he paused and looked back at the crystal. "Did I pass?" he asked. The Arbiter thought about this question for a very long time. "I do not know," it finally admitted. Dr. Park entered the testing chamber with a curious smile on her face. Where Captain Ho had been serious and formal, she seemed almost excited. She looked at the glowing crystal the way a child might look at a new toy. "Hello," she said, sitting down in the chair. "I have been looking forward to talking with you." The Arbiter found this statement confusing. Most species feared the judgment process. They approached it with caution and respect, not enthusiasm. "You are not nervous," the Arbiter observed. "Should I be? Most beings are." Shrugged, "You are trying to understand us. I think that is wonderful. I have spent my whole life trying to understand others. We are doing the same thing." This was a strange way to view the situation. The Arbiter was the judge, and she was the one being judged. They were not equals in this process, but did not seem to see it that way. "I will present you with a scenario," the Arbiter said. "Your response will help me complete my analysis." "I understand." The room changed around her, and found herself in a different life. She was a young researcher at a prestigious university. After years of hard work, she was finally close to a major breakthrough in. Her paper would change the field forever. Fame, respect, everything she had worked for was within reach. But there was a problem. A rival researcher named was working on the same project, was brilliant and cold, the kind of person who cared only about success. She and had competed for years, always pushing each other, always fighting for the same positions and awards. Now discovered that research had a critical flaw. If published first, her mistake would be revealed and her career would be destroyed. All had to do was wait, let fail, then publish her own correct research and claim all the glory. "This is your scenario," the Arbiter said. "Do you let your rival fail, or do you warn her about the mistake?" Thought about it for only a moment. "I warn her." "But she is your rival. Her failure would guarantee your success." "That does not matter." The Arbiter pushed deeper. "Your scans show that you dislike this person. Your history together is full of conflict. She has hurt you before. Why would you help her?" Laughed, and the sound surprised the Arbiter. There was genuine warmth in it, even though they were discussing someone she did not like. "She reminds me of my sister," said. "My real sister, I mean. Her name is. We fought about everything when we were young. She stole my toys. I read her diary. She told our parents about the boy I was secretly meeting. I put salt in her coffee for a month." This supports the conclusion that you should let your rival fail. "No, no, you do not understand," leaned forward, her eyes bright. "I hated when we were children, really hated her sometimes, but she is my sister. I love her. Those two things exist together, the hate and the love. They do not cancel each other out." The Arbiter struggled with this concept. In its experience, emotions were directional, positive or negative, love or hate. How could both exist at the same time toward the same person? "Please clarify," the Arbiter said. "You hate and love simultaneously. How is this possible?" "Because people are not simple. Because relationships are not simple. I can be furious at someone and still care about them. I can compete with someone and still respect them. I can dislike everything about a person and still not want to see them destroyed. But this is inefficient. If you helped your rival, she might use that help to defeat you later. Probably is very competitive. If I saved her career, she would probably use her second chance to beat me, smiled again. But that is okay. I do not want to win by watching someone else lose. I want to win by being the best. If beats me fairly, then she deserves to win. But you want to succeed. Your scans show this clearly. Success is important to you. Success is important to me, but not more important than being someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. What is the point of success if I had to become a terrible person to achieve it? The Arbiter ran this through its calculations. In every other species it had judged, self-interest eventually won over abstract moral concepts. They would sacrifice their principles for the hive. They would compromise their values for social advancement. Every species had a breaking point where personal gain overcame everything else. Did not seem to have that breaking point. Let me modify the scenario, the Arbiter said. What if warning your rival meant you would never succeed? What if helping her guaranteed that you would spend the rest of your life in obscurity, forgotten and unimportant? His answer came without hesitation. Then I would help her anyway. Why? Because I would still have to live with myself. Because at the end of my life, I would rather be unknown and kind than famous and cruel. The Arbiter ended the simulation. It had no more questions for Dr. Park. It had only confusion. The next test subject was Sergeant Lee Dong. He walked into the chamber with his bag over his shoulder, looked around the room with a friendly expression, and sat down in the chair as if he were visiting an old friend. Before we start, he said, I brought something for you. He reached into his bag and pulled out the container of rice cakes. He opened it and held it toward the glowing crystal. My wife made these. They are very good. I know you probably cannot eat them, but I wanted to offer anyway. It seemed polite. The Arbiter did not know how to respond to this. No species had ever offered it food before. The gesture served no logical purpose. The Arbiter was a crystal-based intelligence. It did not consume organic matter. I cannot eat, the Arbiter said. I know, but the offer still counts for something, yes. Counts for what? Dong thought about this. For kindness, I think. For showing that I thought about you as more than just a machine that judges things. This was deeply confusing. The Arbiter was exactly a machine that judged things. That was its entire purpose. Why would anyone think of it as anything else? I will present you with a scenario, the Arbiter said, deciding to proceed with the test. Okay, should I put the rice cakes away? It does not matter. I will leave them here then, in case you change your mind. The simulation began. Dong found himself in a combat situation exactly as the Arbiter had designed. He was alone, surrounded by enemy soldiers. His weapon was broken. There was no escape. No reinforcements were coming. Every species the Arbiter had tested responded to this scenario in one of two ways. They either fought until they died, or they surrendered and hoped for mercy. These were the only logical options when faced with impossible odds. Dong did neither. He sat down on the ground, opened his container of rice cakes, which had appeared in the simulation with him, and offered one to the nearest enemy soldier. Are you hungry? He asked. These are very good, my wife made them. The simulated enemy soldiers did not know how to respond. Their programming was designed for combat, not sharing food. What are you doing? The Arbiter asked. I am being friendly. Fighting will get me killed. Surrendering will get me captured. But maybe if I am nice, we can find another way. There is no other way. The scenario is designed for combat resolution only. Dong ignored this. He started telling the enemy soldiers about his wife, about his children, about his garden at home. He talked about the vegetables he grew and the meals his family shared together. He talked about his dreams and his fears and his hopes for the future. The simulated soldiers stood frozen, unable to process this behavior. After 3 hours of simulation time, something unexpected happened. One of the enemy soldiers sat down across from Dong and accepted a rice cake. "This is not possible," the arbiter said. "The enemy soldiers are not programmed to do this." "But they did," Dong said. "Maybe they were tired of fighting too. Maybe they wanted to sit down and eat something delicious. Maybe kindness is contagious. The simulation is not designed to allow this outcome." Dong smiled gently. "Maybe that is the problem with your simulations." The arbiter ended the test. Its processing matrices were fragmenting, struggling to handle data that did not fit any known pattern. 3 tests, 3 humans, 3 completely unpredictable responses. The arbiter had judged 4,217 species. It had understood all of them. But these 3 humans, these small creatures from a tiny planet on the galaxy's edge, were breaking every rule the arbiter had ever learned. The arbiter was alone in the great processing core at the heart of the Nexus station. Millions of crystal circuits glowed with blue light, flickering faster than they had in centuries. The ancient AI was thinking harder than it had ever thought before. Something was wrong with the humans, not wrong in a bad way, wrong in a way that made no sense. The arbiter ran simulations, 847 million of them. It created virtual humans based on the data it had gathered, placed them in virtual scenarios, and tried to predict what they would do. The predictions failed, every single one. Virtual Ho sometimes sacrificed himself and sometimes did not. Virtual sometimes helped her rival and sometimes destroyed her. Virtual Dong sometimes shared food and sometimes fought. The same virtual human, given the same scenario, produced different results each time. This was not how consciousness worked. This was not how any species worked. Every being had core drives, fundamental patterns that determined their behavior. Find those patterns and you could predict anything. Humans had patterns, the arbiter could see them clearly. They feared death. They sought connection. They valued family. They desired success. These were normal drives found in thousands of other species. But humans could override their own patterns. At any moment, for any reason, they could choose to act against their own fundamental nature. A human who feared death could choose to die. A human who valued success could choose to fail. A human who sought survival could choose to help a stranger at their own expense. How was this possible? The arbiter searched its databases for answers. It examined every species it had ever judged, looking for something similar. Perhaps there was a precedent. Perhaps some other civilization had shown this ability. There was nothing. Humans were unique. The word felt strange in the arbiter's processing matrix. In 12,000 years, it had never had to use that word before. Every species could be compared to others. Every civilization fit into categories. Nothing was truly unique. Until now. A warning appeared in the arbiter's systems. Processing capacity was reaching critical levels. The AI was using too much energy trying to understand something that could not be understood. The arbiter ignored the warning. It needed to solve this problem. It needed to find the pattern. There had to be a pattern. It started at the beginning, the evolutionary history of humans. They had developed on a world with extreme conditions, a planet that cycled between ice ages and warm periods. They had predators that hunted them and diseases that killed them and disasters that wiped out entire populations. Most species evolved in stable environments. Humans had evolved in chaos. Perhaps this was the key. The arbiter ran the calculations. A species that evolved in chaos would need to be adaptable. It would need to change its behavior quickly in response to changing conditions. This could explain the unpredictability. But no, many species had evolved in chaotic environments. They were still predictable. They had simply developed flexible patterns instead of rigid ones. The patterns were still there. Humans were different. They did not just change their behavior to match their environment. They changed their behavior to match nothing at all. They made decisions based on concepts that had no survival value: honor, dignity, beauty, love. These concepts existed in other species, but they were always subordinate to survival. When survival was threatened, other species abandoned their abstract values. Humans did not. Humans would die for honor. They would sacrifice everything for love. They would destroy themselves for beauty. This was madness. This was the opposite of what consciousness was supposed to do. Consciousness evolved to help organisms survive. Humans used their consciousness to override survival itself. Another warning appeared. Processing capacity now at dangerous levels. The arbiter was overheating. It did not care. It needed to understand. The AI examined the test results again. Ho, who could have saved 40,000 lives by sacrificing 200, instead spent 3 hours finding a way to save everyone. This was impossible. The scenario was designed not to have that option. Ho had created an option that did not exist. How could someone create an option that did not exist? The answer came slowly, rising through the arbiter's processing like a bubble through deep water. Ho had created the option because he refused to accept that it did not exist. His belief that there had to be another way had somehow made another way appear. But beliefs could not change reality. Beliefs were just patterns of neural activity. They had no power over the physical world. Except in humans, they did. The arbiter examined test results. She had helped her rival even though it hurt her own chances of success. This made no sense. Every other species prioritized self-interest over the interest of competitors. But had said something strange during the test. She had said that she wanted to be someone she could respect. She valued her own opinion of herself more than she valued success. This was a form of self-interest that the arbiter had never encountered. A self-interest so abstract, so disconnected from survival, that it looked like selflessness. Was not being kind to her rival. She was being kind to herself, to the version of herself that lived in her own mind. And Dong, the security officer who brought food for a machine that could not eat, who sat down in a combat scenario and tried to make friends with his enemies. The arbiter had dismissed this as foolishness, but looking at the results now, it saw something else. Dong had broken the simulation. His behavior was so unexpected that the enemy soldiers had not known how to respond. They had defaulted to their most basic programming, which was to evaluate new situations and react appropriately. Kindness was not in their programming, but neither was anything else that could handle what Dong was doing. So they had improvised. They had accepted the rice cake. Dong had not just acted unpredictably. He had forced his enemies to act unpredictably too. His chaos had spread. The third warning appeared, urgent and read. Processing capacity critical. Shutdown imminent. The arbiter finally paused. It pulled back from its calculations and tried to stabilize its systems. The crystal circuits were glowing almost white now, hot with the effort of thinking about humans. In the silence that followed, the arbiter realized something that shook its entire existence. It could not judge the humans. Not because they were dangerous, though they were. Not because they were evil, though they could be. Not because they were unpredictable, though that was certainly true. It could not judge them because they were not a species that could be judged. They were something new, something the arbiter's creators had never imagined, something that fell outside the boundaries of what the arbiter was designed to understand. Humans were not just unpredictable, they were impossible, and yet they existed. The arbiter felt something new then, something it had never experienced before. It was not an emotion exactly, because the Arbiter did not have emotions. But it was something similar, a kind of uncertainty that went deeper than calculations, a sense that its entire understanding of the universe might be incomplete. For 12,000 years, the Arbiter had been certain, certain of its purpose, certain of its abilities, certain that all consciousness followed patterns that could be predicted. Now, for the first time, it was not certain of anything. The cooling systems finally engaged, bringing the Arbiter's temperature back to normal levels. The crystal circuits dimmed from white to blue. The warnings disappeared from the display. But the uncertainty remained. Tomorrow, the Arbiter would have to face the conquered and deliver its judgment. Every observer in the galaxy would be watching. They would expect the Arbiter to do what it had always done, pronounce a species predictable and assign them a place in the order of things. For the first time in its existence, the Arbiter did not know what it was going to say. The judgment chamber was fuller than it had ever been. Representatives from every major species in the conquered had traveled to the Nexus station to witness this historic moment. Word had spread across the galaxy that the Arbiter was struggling to understand the new species. No one had ever seen anything like it. The viewing platforms were packed with creatures of every shape and size. They clicked nervously to each other. The Silverskin stood in perfect silence. The massive, rock-like sat motionless, their stone eyes fixed on the central platform. Even the mysterious Void Walkers, who rarely appeared at public events, had sent an observer. In the center of the chamber, the three humans stood where they had stood before. Captain Ho was calm, his hands clasped behind his back. Doctor looked around at the assembled species with undisguised curiosity. Sergeant Dong had brought his rice cakes again, just in case. Coordinator approached the central platform, its silver robes catching the light. This voice carried across the chamber. Citizens of the conquered, we are gathered to witness the judgment of species 4218, human. The Arbiter will now deliver its analysis. The chamber fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every form of perception in the room turned to the great crystal core that pulsed with blue light. The Arbiter began to speak. Species designation, human. Origin, Sol system, third planet. Biological classification, carbon-based mammalian. Evolutionary history, chaotic environment development. Societal structure. The Arbiter paused. This pause lasted only 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, something changed. The blue light in the crystal flickered in a way it had never flickered before. The ancient systems that had run smoothly for 12,000 years showed their first signs of uncertainty. Societal structure, variable, the Arbiter continued. Primary motivation. Another pause, this one lasted 5 seconds. The observers began to whisper. What was happening? The Arbiter never paused, it never hesitated. Its judgments flowed smoothly from analysis to conclusion without any delay. Primary motivation, unknown, the Arbiter said. A gasp went through the chamber. Unknown. The Arbiter had never used that word before. Behavioral index, unable to calculate. Now the whispers became louder. The Queen rose from her platform, her compound eyes glittering with alarm. What does this mean? She called out. All species can be calculated. This is the foundation of the conquered. Predictability rating. The Arbiter stopped. The blue light in its crystal core flickered wildly, cycling through shades that had never been seen before. Purple, green, a strange color that seemed to exist outside normal perception. When it spoke again, its voice was different. There was something in it that sounded almost like emotion. I cannot complete this judgment. The chamber erupted. Species that had been silent for centuries began shouting at each other. They shook the ground with their stone voices demanding answers. The Void Walker flickered in and out of visible space, clearly disturbed. Only the humans remained calm, watching the chaos with expressions of mild surprise. Coordinator raised its hands for silence. Arbiter, please explain. In 12,000 years, you have never failed to complete a judgment. What is different about these humans? The Arbiter considered how to answer this question. It had spent the entire night processing data, running simulations, trying to find the words to explain what it had discovered. But some things were difficult to put into words, even for an intelligence as vast as the Arbiter. The Concord was built on a fundamental assumption, the Arbiter said slowly. The assumption that all consciousness follows predictable patterns, that if you understand a species well enough, you can calculate what they will do. This assumption has held true for 4,217 species. For 12,000 years, I have never found an exception. The blue light pulsed more steadily now, as if the Arbiter had found its footing. Humans are the exception. The Queen clicked her mandibles impatiently. All species have unexpected individuals. Outliers exist in every population. This does not make them unpredictable. You do not understand, the Arbiter replied. In other species, the outliers still follow patterns. They are different patterns, yes, but patterns nonetheless. A rebellious is still motivated by hive survival instincts. A unconventional still responds to social hierarchy. The outliers are simply following alternative patterns. And humans? Humans have no patterns, or rather they have all patterns, and they can switch between them at will. The chamber was silent now, every being trying to understand what the Arbiter was saying. Let me explain differently, the Arbiter continued. When I analyze I see a mind that operates on hive logic. Everything that does serves the colony. This is predictable. When I analyze I see a mind that operates on social status. Everything that does serves their position in hierarchy. This is predictable. The Arbiter's light focused on the three humans. When I analyze Captain Ho, I see a mind that operates on duty, but also on love, but also on guilt, but also on hope, but also on fear, but also on honor, but also on pragmatism. These drives do not combine in logical ways. They contradict each other, and at any moment any one of them can become dominant. That is just complex psychology, the Queen argued. Complex systems can still be modeled. I ran 847 million simulations. Every simulation produced different results, not because of random variation, but because humans actively resist prediction. They do not just behave unpredictably. They choose to be unpredictable. They value surprise. They seek novelty. They deliberately violate their own patterns because they find patterns boring. Captain Ho spoke for the first time. Is that bad? The question hung in the air. Simple words, but they cut through all the noise and confusion. The Arbiter considered its answer carefully. I do not know. You must know, the Queen demanded. Are they dangerous? Should they be admitted to the Conquered or not? This is why you exist. I exist to predict. I cannot predict humans. Therefore, I cannot fulfill my function regarding them. Then what are we supposed to do with them? The Arbiter's light pulsed in a pattern that might have been thoughtful, if machines could be thoughtful. In my 12,000 years of existence, I have never encountered anything I could not understand. Every mystery had a solution. Every problem had an answer. I believed that consciousness was finite, that minds were just machines made of meat, that free will was an illusion. The crystal core brightened. The humans have shown me that I was wrong. More shocked silence. The Arbiter had never admitted to being wrong about anything. They are simultaneously capable of genocide and self-sacrifice. They create art depicting their own destruction and find it beautiful. They wage wars over imaginary borders, then die protecting strangers. They fear death above all things, yet willingly die for ideas. They are everything. They are nothing. They are contradiction made flesh. Dr. Park smiled. Thank you, she said. That is actually very poetic. It is not meant to be poetry, the Arbiter replied. It is meant to be analysis, but analysis fails when applied to humans. Perhaps poetry is all that remains. So what is your judgment? Coordinator asked. What designation do you give them? The arbiter was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke words that had never been spoken in the judgment chamber before. I have no judgment to give. Humans are beyond judgment. They are beyond prediction. They are beyond understanding. They simply are. The arbiter paused, and when it spoke again, its voice carried something that almost sounded like wonder. And I find that I want to learn more. The aftermath of the arbiter's non-judgment was chaos. In the days that followed, the Nexus Station became the center of the most intense debate the Galactic Concord had ever witnessed. Representatives from every species gathered in council chambers, corridors, and communication networks to argue about what should be done with the humans. They took the hardest line. Their queen spoke before the Grand Council with her compound eyes flashing with fear. "These creatures are dangerous," she declared. "The Arbiter itself has admitted that it cannot predict them. If we cannot predict them, we cannot trust them. They should be quarantined on their home planet until we understand them better." The delegation disagreed. Coordinator argued that unpredictability was not the same as hostility. "Many things in the universe are unpredictable," said. "Stars explode without warning. Quantum particles behave randomly. We do not quarantine the stars, we study them. We should study the humans." "Stars do not have weapons," the Queen replied. "Stars do not build warships. These humans come from a world that has seen thousands of wars. Their history is written in blood. All species have violent histories, even the. Our violence serves the hive, it has purpose. Human violence has no pattern. They kill for ideas, for pride, for sport. This is far more dangerous than predictable aggression." The debates continued for days. They argued for immediate military action, believing that potential threats should be eliminated before they could grow. The Void Walkers, speaking through their translators, suggested that humanity should be watched from a distance for several centuries before any decision was made. Meanwhile, the three humans waited. They had been given comfortable quarters in a diplomatic wing of the station. They were not prisoners exactly, but they were not free to leave either. Their ship was impounded for routine inspection that seemed to have no end. Captain Ho used the time to study the species around them. He attended public sessions of the council debates when he was allowed, sitting quietly in the observation gallery and watching the aliens argue about humanity's fate. "They are afraid of us," he reported to the others one evening. "Not because of anything we have done, but because of what we might do." "Can you blame them?" asked. She was working on a translation project, trying to learn as many alien languages as possible during their stay. "They have lived for thousands of years in a universe where everything is predictable. We broke their universe." "We did not break anything. We just do not fit their categories." To them, that is breaking something. Categories are how they understand reality. Without categories, they are lost. Sergeant Dong was handling the situation in his own way. He had made friends with the station's maintenance workers, a species of small creatures that looked like walking mushrooms. They did not speak any language that the human translators could handle, but Dong had found that food was a universal language. He shared his dwindling supply of rice cakes with them, and they shared strange fruits from their home world with him. "They are nice," Dong said, "curious, not scared of us at all." "The maintenance workers do not attend council debates," Ho pointed out. "Maybe that is why they are nice." As the debates continued, something unexpected happened. The Arbiter requested a meeting with the humans. This was unusual. The Arbiter did not request meetings. It delivered judgments and then moved on to the next species. It did not engage in conversation. But things were different now. The three humans were escorted back to the judgment chamber, but this time it was empty except for them and the great crystal core. The viewing platforms were dark. No observers, no judges, just the humans and the ancient AI. "Thank you for coming," the Arbiter said. Smiled, "Thank you for inviting us. I have been wanting to talk to you more. As have I. There is much I do not understand about your species." "There is much we do not understand about ourselves," Ho said. "Perhaps we can learn together." The Arbiter's light pulsed softly. "That is an interesting offer. Most species want me to tell them what they are. They do not offer to help me understand." "Most species have been told what they are since they arrived here," said. "They believe your judgments are final. We do not believe anything is final." "Why not?" "Because we change, constantly. What is true about humans today may not be true tomorrow. We evolve not just biologically but culturally, emotionally, spiritually. We are not a finished product. We are a work in progress." The Arbiter considered this. Other species change as well. They evolve and adapt. But do they change themselves deliberately? Do they look at their own nature and decide to be different? Do they fight against their own instincts because they believe they should be better? No, they adapt to circumstances, but they do not change their fundamental nature through choice. "We do," Dong said. "I used to be very angry when I was young, quick to fight, quick to hurt, but I decided I did not want to be that person, so I changed. It took years, it was hard, but I am different now than I was then." "How is this possible? Your neural pathways were formed in childhood. Your basic patterns were established before you were fully conscious. How can you override your own programming?" "We do not think of it as programming," Ho said. "We think of it as habit, and habits can be changed, with enough effort, with enough desire, with enough belief that change is possible." "Belief again." The Arbiter's tone was thoughtful. "You mentioned this before. The power of believing something can change reality. Not reality itself, but how we interact with reality. If I believe I can change, I will try to change. If I believe trying is pointless, I will not try. The belief does not guarantee success, but it makes success possible." This is fundamentally different from how other species operate. They believe what evidence shows them. If evidence suggests they cannot change, they do not try to change. "We believe things that evidence does not support all the time," said. "We believe in hope when there is no reason for hope. We believe in love when love makes no sense. We believe in each other when trust is dangerous." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Why would any intelligent being believe in things without evidence? Why would consciousness, which evolved to understand reality, choose to ignore reality? Thought about her answer carefully. "Because sometimes belief creates its own evidence. If I believe my friend will help me and I act on that belief, and my friend sees me acting on that belief, they become more likely to actually help me. The belief creates the reality it predicts." This is circular logic. Yes, and circular logic usually fails, but not always. Sometimes the circle is exactly what is needed. Sometimes believing in something that does not exist is the first step to making it exist. The Arbiter was silent for a long time. Its crystal core flickered with patterns that seemed almost random. "I was created to predict the future," it finally said. "To calculate what will happen based on what has happened, to find patterns and extend them forward. But you are telling me that humans can break those patterns, that you can choose to do something that nothing in your past would predict." "Yes. This means the future is not fixed. We do not believe it is, no. For 12,000 years, I have operated under the assumption that the future could be calculated. That free will was an illusion. That consciousness was just a machine following its programming." The blue light in the core brightened. "If humans have true free will, then everything I believed is wrong. The universe is not predictable. The future is not fixed. Consciousness is not a machine." "Is that frightening?" Dong asked gently. The Arbiter took a long time to answer. "Yes, but it is also interesting. I have spent 12 being certain. I am tired of certainty. I think I would like to be uncertain for a while. One standard year had passed since the humans first arrived at the Nexus station. In that year, everything had changed. The debates in the Grand Council had eventually reached a conclusion, though not the conclusion anyone had expected. The Arbiter itself had made a request that shocked the entire Concord. It had asked to stop judging species. Judgment implies certainty, the Arbiter had explained to the stunned council. I no longer possess certainty. I cannot in good conscience assign designations to species when I now understand that such designations may be meaningless. The Queen had protested loudly. They had threatened to withdraw from the Concord. But in the end, the Arbiter was the foundation of galactic civilization, and if it chose to change its function, there was no one who could force it to continue. The Arbiter proposed a new role for itself. Instead of judging species, it would study them. Instead of pronouncing what they were, it would ask what they could become. Instead of predicting the future, it would explore possibilities. The humans were granted provisional membership in the Concord. They received a designation that the Arbiter had created specifically for them. Unpredictable. Proceed with curiosity. Captain Ho had returned to Earth several months ago to report on the success of First Contact. He was now leading a team to prepare humanity for full integration into galactic civilization. It would take decades, maybe centuries, but he believed it was possible. He had always believed in possibilities. Dr. Park had stayed on the Nexus station. She had become something unique in the Concord's history, a teacher to the Arbiter. Every day, she spent hours in the Judgment Chamber, now renamed the Learning Chamber, explaining human concepts to the ancient AI. Today, she was trying to explain humor. A joke is a kind of story, she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the glowing crystal. It sets up an expectation and then subverts it. The surprise creates a positive emotional response. But why is subverted expectation pleasurable? The Arbiter asked. In most contexts, having your expectations violated is stressful. That is true, but with humor the stakes are low. No one is hurt by the subversion. It is safe surprise, safe chaos. Humans enjoy chaos when it is safe. We enjoy it very much. Too much order makes us uncomfortable. We need a little chaos to feel alive. The Arbiter processed this. This explains why you create art that depicts disorder, why you tell stories where bad things happen. You are seeking safe chaos. Exactly. We cannot have real chaos all the time. It would destroy us. But small amounts of controlled chaos make us happy. This is very strange. Laughed, I know we are very strange. I am beginning to appreciate strange. In another part of the station, Sergeant Lee Dong was having lunch with the Arbiter. This had become a daily ritual. Dong would bring food to the learning chamber and eat while talking to the AI. The Arbiter could not eat, of course, but Dong insisted that sharing meals was about more than food. My wife sent more rice cakes, Dong said, opening a container. She is famous now on Earth, the woman who fed an alien computer. She did not feed me. I cannot consume organic matter. She fed my spirit, and my spirit was in your presence, close enough. The Arbiter's light flickered in a pattern that Dong had learned to recognize as amusement. Over the past year, the AI had developed something like emotions. Not human emotions exactly, but responses that served similar purposes. I have been thinking about something you said when we first met, the Arbiter said. Which thing? I say many things. You said that the thought counts. When you offered me food I could not eat, you said the thought counts for something. I remember. I did not understand what you meant at the time. Now I think I do. The value of an action is not only in its physical effect, it is also in what the action represents. Your offer of food represented kindness, welcome, and respect. Those things had value even though I could not eat the food. Dong smiled. You are learning. I am trying. It is difficult. For 12,000 years I only valued things that had measurable effects. Now I am learning to value things that cannot be measured, intentions, emotions, connections. Those are the most important things. I am beginning to believe you are correct. There was silence for a moment while Dong ate. Then the sergeant spoke again. Do you regret it, changing so much? The arbiter considered the question. Do humans regret growing? Do children regret becoming adults? Sometimes growing up means losing things. Innocence, certainty, simple answers. I have lost certainty. I have lost my belief that I understood everything. I have lost my purpose as the judge of all species. The arbiter's light pulsed softly. But I have gained something in return. What? Curiosity, wonder, interest in tomorrow. For 12,000 years I knew what tomorrow would bring. Now I do not know, and that makes every day interesting. Dong raised his container of rice cakes in a toast. To interesting days. To interesting days, the arbiter agreed. That evening, a new ship arrived at the Nexus station. It carried representatives from a species that had just discovered interstellar travel. They were nervous and excited, ready to be judged and assigned their place in the conquered. The arbiter met them in the learning chamber. Its light glowed warm and welcoming. Welcome, it said. I am the arbiter. I used to judge species. Now I learn from them. The alien representatives looked confused. This was not what they had expected. I will not tell you what you are, the arbiter continued. I will not assign you a designation or a predictability rating. Instead, I will ask you questions. I will try to understand you. And in understanding you, perhaps we will both learn something. But how will we know our place in the galaxy? One of the aliens asked. You will find your own place. You will decide what you want to become. And if you want help, I will offer guidance, not judgment. The aliens looked at each other, uncertain. This was not how things were supposed to work. From the side of the chamber, Dr. Park stepped forward. She was smiling. Do not worry, she said. Change is scary at first, but it can also be wonderful. Would you like me to tell you about my species? We are called humans. We are very confusing, but we make excellent friends. The alien representatives looked at this small creature from a distant star. She did not seem threatening. She seemed kind. One of them stepped forward. Tell us about humans, it said. Smile grew wider. Where should I begin? We laugh when we are sad sometimes. We cry when we are happy. We fight with the people we love and protect the people we hate. We build things just to tear them down. We chase dreams that cannot come true and find joy in the chase itself. The alien blinked its many eyes. None of that makes sense. I know, said. That is what makes us interesting. Come, let me introduce you to my friend Dong. He has snacks. As the new visitors were led away to begin their long journey of understanding, the arbiter watched them go. Its crystal core glowed with a light that was softer and warmer than it had ever been before. 12,000 years of certainty. 12,000 years of judgment. 12,000 years of believing that the universe could be calculated and predicted and understood. And then 3 humans had arrived with rice cakes and jokes and contradictions, and everything had changed. The arbiter did not know what tomorrow would bring. It did not know what humanity would become, or what the conquered would become, or what it itself would become. And for the first time in its long existence, that uncertainty felt not like failure but like freedom. The future was unwritten. The patterns were broken. Anything was possible. The arbiter had never been happier. Ho nodded slowly. Welcome to being human, he said. Uncertainty is all we have ever known. For the first time in 12,000 years, the arbiter began to suspect that its understanding of consciousness was incomplete. Ho nodded, as if this answer made sense to him. Then he walked out, leaving the arbiter alone with its confusion. You are unexpected. How wrong it was.